What's happening, everybody?
I like to think anybody can grow. It really isn't that hard at all.
In-Tents
All the
Genetix.
followers on Facebook, everybody who's been participating in the giveaways, it really does mean the world to me.
You're so knowledgeable. You're like an encyclopedia with this stuff. And I think the goal here is to spread that knowledge to some of your fans, your followers, your supporters. Tell us a little bit about what you aim to do here.
Yeah, I think the goal is really to just kind of spread how I have been, all the knowledge I've kind of gained through the years, through experience and through really jumping in on, I'll be honest, YouTube has been my university when it comes to this. Um, I've definitely I definitely watch a lot of content creators, and I've seen a lot of different, styles of growing and how different people are doing it. And I've kind of narrowed it down to where I think this is probably the easiest way for a beginning grower to really to shine, to really just crush it, with little effort. And yeah, I think that's the way to do it. I think that's the way to do it, is just kind of show, or not necessarily show, but share my experience of where I've come and how I've started growing and then how I do it, and I try to share that on the Facebook as well with pictures and descriptions, but it's different when you can hear somebody talking to you. It doesn't, not everybody likes to read, and I get that, and it's nice to just kind of have another way to communicate to the people.
From my perspective, I feel like there's, when getting started, what is like the minimum type of equipment you need. And I think there's really five categories here that people need to consider when getting started. Um, the tents or the grow space itself, the lights, the airflow, the temperature control, and choosing between soil and hydro. So, why don't you let us know a little bit what, maybe what kind of setup you use as far as tents, lights, airflow, temperature control, and soil or hydro?
Yeah, absolutely. So my big one is I like the Gorilla Grow tents. They're a really solid tent. So for my space, I run in 2x4 tents, and I also run in a 4x4 space. And I have a perpetual grow, so I use both spaces constantly. And it's nice to be able to have both spaces for multiple different reasons. For lighting, I use Mars Hydro currently for the 2x4. I have a SP 3000. It's a 300-watt light to cover the space. I feel like 300 watts is a good amount of light for 2x4 worth of space. And in the 4x4, I run the Science LED. It's a Raging Kush 2.0. It's a really nice light. I'm able to spectrum control it and everything. And my setup is probably more on the higher end, and where it's more the hobbyist grower, not necessarily the beginner grower, somebody who's been really into it and wants to really dive in and play with all the tools that are available. As far as exhaust systems go, I'm a big proponent of the AC Infinity exhaust systems. I think they're fantastic. I've been all about them since they first hit the market. It's nice to be able to set it and forget it. It comes with a nice temperature probe that you can just set at canopy height and then set your parameters, and the exhaust fan kicks on and off. And it's able to really control the environment of the tent remotely without you needing to be there and check on it or anything like that. So it's very nice. It's been a game changer for sure. Before that, back in the day, I was running an exhaust fan, from Home Depot, and always running it and trying to, balance temperature with how much it's exhausting. And it wasn't always as easy as it is now. Things have definitely changed. So it's much easier these days for an entry level grower to come in, set it and forget it. And that's really nice. I also use fans just to keep the airflow moving within the tent. You can get cheap fans on Amazon. I use the Amazon brand ones. I use the Hurricane ones. I use Secret Garden ones. I haven't tried the new AC Infinity oscillating ones. They look decent, but I haven't sprung for those just yet. Um, really like having airflow above and below the canopy at all times to prevent chances of mold. Uh, Soil or hydro? I've done both. I really have. I started with soil and I saw the benefits in hydro and I switched to DWC and the benefits were definitely there. But I always liked the way the flavor came from the soil and the earthiness and that kind of thing. I really appreciated the soil for that. So I've gone back to organic style of growing with soil and dry amendments and a few other little additives here and there, but for the most part, it's just soil and Gaia Green for the most part is the main base of it. Use fabric pots, really enjoy those for final containers. They work really well. I have a nice big flood tray on the bottom of the tent that covers the entire floor to catch any runoff because I use a drip system in order to feed the plants. And
Um,
that's just,
describe
I set
describe
that
the
up
drip
myself.
system. Describe that drip system to us a little bit.
So the watering system's really fantastic. You can get in there and hand water. I do hand water quite a bit with just a 2 gallon pot, just watering it in by hand, which is really great. But when you're going on vacation and you're not there and nobody treats your plants like you do, and you want to make sure it's done right, you're going to want to set up a reservoir with a drip system, and then you could go away for a week or two on vacation and not worry about it. So when running multiple plants, it's nice to be able to just do that so you're not in there hand watering every one. So the way I set it up is I have a 32-gallon garbage can or like a food grade Rubbermaid type garbage can, and I fill that up. And I use a pump pump a 1/2 inch trunk line into the tent that's capped off on the end, and within the trunk line there's not drip emitters. There's a connection manifold, then it splits off into 4 1/4 inch lines that go into a drip emitter that goes into each pot. And the drip emitters shoot the water in a 360. So I put it right in the center of the pot and it pretty much gets a good coverage. And as long as you water it enough, it should be just fine. And those work great. I do check on them to make sure that they don't clog and make sure that water is always flowing when I do go to water with them. But yeah, the drip system works great. It works really good. Drip lines are fairly simple. I use all black polyurethane in order to prevent mold from or algae from forming in the lines so that you don't run into any issues there. And then I think that's about it as far as the setup. I mean,
Yeah, that was one
fan
of my
size would be the only
that
thing.
that was one of my
So
early
the
mistakes. Using clear lines, just didn't even think about it. And yeah, they definitely get green. If that light is able to hit where the water is, if there's any sort of contact between the water and the light, it will develop algae. So that's very important. I feel to use those black lines.
Yeah,
I mean,
especially if you're going to
it's
keep using them.
unavoidable. It's going to happen.
If you're setting up just a drip system for like a week and you're just using it for when you go on vacation, a clear line won't be that bad because it's not going to have the time for the algae to form. But if you're using it for every watering and throughout the entire growth cycle, I highly recommend going with black polyurethane. And then I use a pond pump. It's a larger pump and it's able to really give enough force in order to water multiple drip emitters. Because if you get a small pump, it's not going to be enough to feed all of the drip emitters. It's not going to be enough gallons per minute or whatever
And
the
then
rating is on those.
and then the pump sits in the reservoir, which also has an air stone in it. Correct?
So the reservoir does have an air stone in it. I have an air pump on the outside. I use a commercial grade air pump that just has a manifold with several different 1/4 inch lines that come off onto an air stone that I just toss in. And I mainly use the watering system as needed. I rarely fill it up and leave it on a timer and just let it kind of water itself. I only do that when I do go on trips and vacations. For the most part, I'm filling it up and mixing the water batch fresh every time. So the water is not really sitting around too long, but I do run the air stone while I'm mixing the nutrients and getting the water prepared to be pumped in. So
And then
there is a
you Do you
Oh,
just do
sorry, go ahead.
water straight from the sink or?
The water I use for the grow is reverse osmosis water. It's a filtered water that removes, it's a three-layer filter system that removes everything, literally almost everything. My water goes from like 157 parts per million down to like 14 parts per million. So it has really nothing left in it, strips it of all calcium and iron and boron and anything else that's in your normal tap water. So it's nice to be able to get a clean slate for when you're adding what you need in.
So for somebody who's just starting out, maybe doesn't have access to a reverse osmosis system, is tap water okay? Should they then leave it in a reservoir with an air stone in order to try and help clear some of that chlorine out and whatnot?
Absolutely. Chlorine will gas off over time. You could just leave it normally in a bucket or in a reservoir, just open to the air, and that'll gas off. But to speed up the process and really get it all out of there, you're going to want to throw an air stone in there. And then that'll also help to oxygenate the water and keep it really ready for those roots. And there's no harm in throwing a little oxygen in there, but yes, it will definitely help speed up the dechlorinating process. It won't get rid of chloramines, but it will get rid of chlorine that will gas off. And they say that under pressure in the pipes, that these chlorines are supposed to gas off immediately once they go in your cup of water to drink, that they're only there under pressure. And as soon as they're expelled from the spout, that this chlorine's just supposed to magically gas off right away. I
Yeah,
don't find it to be
that's
the
the
case.
bullshit they like to feed you, huh?
Yeah, I think leaving it out for a little while to help gas it off really does help. And depending on what medium you're doing, if you're doing soil or hydro or cocoa or whatever you're doing, there are definitely benefits to letting it gas off and getting rid of it. And so I definitely recommend it, 100%. Yeah.
So yeah, it pretty much describes the setup for a basic grow, right? A tent, like you said, a basic light. You need the medium you're going to grow in. You need some fans. You need some airflow. And I mean, just about anybody can do it, though. It's really not that hard, right?
So I like to think anybody can grow, it really isn't that hard at all. It does take some time and some energy and some upfront costs, but those returns from what the tent will give you are gonna pay for itself almost immediately. And every little bit in your pocket will definitely make a difference later on. It's definitely worth the investment, 100%. And I think anybody can do it. I think anybody can do it, especially the way I've kind of narrowed it down to how I do it. It's definitely doable. And the equipment cost is definitely real. It's definitely a real thing, and there's ways to get around it. You don't have to buy the expensive science LED. You can definitely get a generic light, just but just know what comes with it in the long run as far as customer service and other things. Some companies aren't as good as others. And the thing I really recommend people investing their money in, if you're really gonna put it in one place in the grow, would be the light. The light is the engine. It's what's gonna drive your grow. You're gonna wanna really make sure you have a solid light, and that'll really feed it really well.
Yeah, I personally do think it is a little bit of a balance though, because the better light you get, like the more wattage, the hotter it's going to be, the more airflow you need, so on and so forth. So, yeah, definitely, temperature and humidity are a very real thing too. Mold is a real issue, and when it hits your plants, it kills everything. So you don't, definitely want to make sure you have that airflow in there as well for those reasons.
Yeah, yeah. As far as the exhaust fans, I feel like the 4-inch exhaust fan is good enough for the 2x4, and the 6-inch is good enough for the 4x4. I do run an additional booster fan on my 4x4. It's a 6-inch rack seal from AC Infinity, and it's a pretty cheap one, but it's just to help that little extra airflow if the tent got a little too crowded and needs just a little help cleaning out that humidity, because you're absolutely right, that humidity is a killer, and especially in the summertime. and the relative humidity outside is rough, it's even harder to keep it down. And mold is real. Mold is a real thing, and it can definitely be a killer in the grow, especially when you're mid-flower or end of flower and you're running into those problems. It can be pretty heartbreaking. Pretty heartbreaking, yeah.
Yeah, I knew somebody who once told me that they were running a humidifier in their tent, and I'm like, oh man, that's a bad idea. And they're like, no, but it helps during veg, and it's like, okay, like if you're gonna do it right, I'm sure it has its benefits, but he didn't do it right, so it killed his entire tent.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so you got to
Yeesh.
be careful. You got to be careful.
So there's definitely a sweet spot. I've in our location, I've never really felt the need for adding humidity. I always feel like the plants are transpiring enough, except for maybe when they're like really young and they don't have enough foliage to really transpire. But as soon as they hit like mid-veg, they're really good. Like they're giving off enough water to manage the humidity. And really a dehumidifier is another really vital piece of equipment in the grow that is necessary, in my opinion, to be able to control what I like to call the lung room. And the lung room is the room that your tent sits in. And then the lung room air is what the tent draws in from the exhaust at the bottom of the tent through the passive air intake in order to regulate temperature and humidity throughout the tent. And the room that the tent sits in is almost as important as the environment within the tent. And because you're not going to be able to control the environment within the tent if your lung room is out of whack. So you got to make sure that the room is set up for what you're doing, you know?
What's happening, everybody?
I like to think anybody can grow, it really isn't that hard at all.
In-Tents
All the
Genetix.
followers on Facebook, everybody who's been participating in the giveaways, it really does mean the world to me.